No, I don't have a problem with your friendship with Dre. I have a problem that you're in love with Dre.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of All Things Girl World. In today's video, I want to explore the dynamic between longtime friends Sidney and Dre in the 2002 film Brown Sugar. Specifically, how fear of losing friendship can delay romantic love, how emotional avoidance leads to involving the wrong people, and what the film teaches us about timing, honesty, and emotional responsibility in relationships. On one hand, I want to say, if you knew you were in love, why go through the trouble of involving anyone else? But on the other hand, I understand. Let's talk about it. But before we jump into the video, All Things Girl World now has a cozy little home at allthingsgirlworld.com. It's a peaceful corner of the internet where you can read blog posts, watch videos, and subscribe for thoughtful girl world content. And soon there will be some cute merch and digital pieces inspired by our community. After the video, just head over to allthingsgirlworld.com. Brown Sugar was released in 2002 and stars Sanaa Lathan as Sidney and Taye Diggs as Dre. So here's a little background on Sidney and Dre first. They are longtime best friends who grew up together and share a deep bond rooted in their love for hip-hop. They came up watching freestyles, breakdancing, and the early culture of hip-hop on the streets of the Bronx in the 1980s. That shared love for the culture eventually shapes their adult lives, with Sidney becoming an editor at the legendary Double XL magazine and Dre rising through the industry to become a record label executive. Since the beginning of the film, Sidney speaks about hip-hop in a way that feels poetic, almost like she's describing a person. Her language is intimate, nostalgic, and emotional, and it doesn't take long to realize that hip-hop is really functioning as a stand-in for something deeper: her love for Dre. Sidney and Dre meet up at an industry party, and unbeknownst to Sidney, this will be her first introduction to Dre's fiance Reese, played by Nicole Ari Parker. Their first encounter is polite and gracious. Reese even mentions that she's heard so much about Sidney, which unfortunately for her, becomes a recurring theme throughout her relationship with Dre.
Oh my God, I've heard so much about you.
Oh, well, I hope it wasn't too bad.
That first meeting, though, is handled with maturity on both sides. When Dre tells Sidney that he's planning to propose to Reese, you can see Sidney's body language tense up a bit. She becomes slightly uncomfortable. Some people may see that as Sidney simply knowing her best friend and sensing that he might not be ready for a huge commitment like marriage. But to me, I suspect that Sidney already knew she was in love with Dre at that point, so hearing that he plans to propose to another woman forces that truth to the surface. It's like watching her see something she always had but never claimed suddenly belong to someone else.
But, Dre, you've known her for like 5 minutes.
I think she's the one, so...
At one point in the film, Sidney even says that having to share her love of hip-hop with other people was something that she struggled with. So in a way, Reese wasn't just entering Dre's romantic life, she's stepping into a space that Sidney has always emotionally occupied.
Hip-hop was always this personal, regional thing that belonged to just me. I knew I was going to have to share, and that was hard to get used to.
I want to talk about the bridal shower because if the signs weren't clear enough before, honey, the bridal shower told the whole story. This is the moment where I think Reese has a quiet realization that this isn't just any ordinary friendship. For anyone who hasn't seen the movie, there's a game at the bridal shower where the guests are asked questions about Dre to see who knows him best. And Sidney wins by a landslide. Honestly, I don't think anyone else got a single answer right.
What is Dre's favorite drink?
Polar bear. Kettle 1 martini up with a twist, but if he's trying to show off, I'm calling 25.
Right again.
Now, Sidney isn't being malicious. She's not trying to embarrass Reese or make a statement. She's just playing the game. And realistically, she's been friends with Dre since childhood, so of course she knows him better than anyone else in the room. But still, girl, if that were me, I would have pretended that I didn't know at least one or two of the answers because I know exactly how that could look in a room full of women I don't know at a bridal shower for the man I've secretly been in love with. What the bridal shower really reveals is that even when Sidney isn't trying to cross the line is already there. Her knowing Dre that deeply sends a quiet signal not just to Reese, but everyone in the room that their connection is different. And this is where the purpose of this conversation comes in. When love grows out of friendship and goes unspoken for too long, it doesn't stay neutral. It shows up in moments like this where no one is trying to hurt anyone, but someone still ends up feeling it. Let me just say, the scene where Dre shows up at Sidney's house the night before his wedding to vent about label drama felt like a bit too much. Now, I don't think there was anything wrong with Dre confiding in Sidney. It makes sense that she would understand the music business side of his life more than Reese would, but the emotional support is different from professional understanding. And the night before your wedding, the person you should be leaning on emotionally is your fiance. And we see exactly why that boundary matters. Sidney hugging Dre isn't a big deal on its own, but the way that she was wrapped around him in nothing but a towel, holding his face, kissing his cheek, and then his nose? Sidney, that was a lot. And Dre, you're just standing there letting her. The moment crossed from comfort into intimacy, and rightfully so. Sidney realizes it went too far once they share that kiss and tells him that he should leave. Before he goes, she asks him one last time if he's sure he wants to go through with the wedding, and he says yes.
You back? You better go.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to do this tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also have to shout out Sidney's cousin Francine, played by Queen Latifah, because she's the only one who consistently keeps it real. She sees what everyone else is dancing around, that Dre and Sidney belong together, and she's begging them to stop playing this game of just friends and be honest about what they really want. And honestly, it's sad to watch Dre stand at the altar trying to convince himself that he's in love with the woman he's about to marry when the woman he actually loves is sitting in the audience. But I can't fully fault him either, because earlier in their story, Sidney did say that Dre brought up the idea of them being more than friends, and Sidney turned him down. So in his mind, he already took the risk once and it didn't work. So he did do the right thing by at least trying to move on.
Dre asked me once when I was at Columbia if we should try being more than just friends, and I told him no.
No? What is wrong with you, girl?
After the wedding, Francine encourages Sidney to get back out there. She just wants Sidney to be happy and in love, especially now that she's missed her chance with Dre. Enter Kelby, played by Boris Kodjoe, an athlete who requests an interview with Sidney as a clever excuse to get close to her. This is the first man we see pursue Sidney with clarity, intention, and romance, not confusion, not history, not emotional limbo. Their first meetup is minimal but meaningful because Kelby meets Dre for the first time and naturally assumes Dre is Sidney's ex, which says a lot. Not because Sidney and Dre ever officially dated, but for some reason the energy between them looks exactly like that of two people with unresolved history. And once again, Sidney denies what everyone else seems to sense immediately. This is where the theme becomes undeniable. Sidney and Dre may call themselves just friends, but the world keeps responding to them as something else. And that disconnect between how they define their relationship and how they emotionally occupy each other is what keeps creating friction everywhere else. When Dre begins having second thoughts about leaving Millennium Records, he goes to Sidney for emotional grounding. When he arrives, Sidney is drowning in red roses sent by Kelby, who has officially asked her on a date. And while it may seem like a small detail, visually it matters. For the first time, Dre walks into a version of Sidney's life where he's not the emotional center. Someone else is doting on her. Someone else is choosing her loudly. Someone else is occupying the space Dre has quietly filled for years. They head to the park and reminisce about hip-hop, their shared language, and their shared past. Dre reveals that he wants to start his own label, and Sidney, being the supportive friend she is, writes him a check on the spot. But when Dre wants to keep hanging out and celebrating, Sidney has other plans with Kelby. You can almost feel Dre sensing it, not jealousy exactly, but the presence of Kelby is sharper than he'd like. It's as if he's thinking, I'm going through this career crisis and my best friend and emotional anchor is being occupied by someone else. Never mind that he's married now and the only person he should be leaning on is his wife, but I digress.
Okay, I have a date.
Oh, with Kelby? Yeah. So you said yes, huh? What's this cat's number? Because I'm going to call him up and cancel for you. Because you hanging with me tonight.
As things continue to heat up between Sidney and Kelby, cracks begin to show in Dre and Reese's marriage. This is where the truth starts to surface for both of them, and it reinforces a lot of what Reese had already been feeling and suspecting. Dre goes home and tells Reese that he quit his job at the record label, and rightfully so, she's upset. I get Dre's reasoning he needed to make a decision for himself, but I also side with Reese here. You're married now, and a decision as major and impactful as quitting your job should have been a conversation you had with your spouse first.
How it makes me feel, and I lost that love.
First of all, how could you make a change like this without consulting me?
To make matters worse, Reese discovers that Dre confided in Sidney before he spoke to her. That amplifies the tension. Dre tries to justify it, saying he didn't come to Reese because he knew that she would try to talk him out of it, which may be true, but it doesn't change the fact that he should have had the conversation with his wife first. He could have said, I need to do this for me or for my sanity, and that would have been fair, but secrecy and emotional reliance on someone else outside of the marriage creates problems no matter the intent. What really stood out to me in this scene is the contrast in reactions between Sidney and Reese. Sidney is supportive and encouraging of Dre's dream to start his own label, while Reese is frustrated and hurt. And it could have been easier for Sidney to be supportive of Dre when she doesn't have to deal with Dre in the same way that Reese does. So his decisions won't impact her in a way that it does with the person he's sharing financial responsibilities with. That contrast creates a new layer of conflict. And by the time Reese confronts Sidney at the gym, you can feel that tension boil over.
He lets you in a way that he hasn't let me in yet. And all the secrets I have to beg for, you already know. It is maybe the fact that you're that close bothers me.
Despite the confrontation at the gym, Sidney and Reese would see each other again at a New Year's Eve celebration with friends, and this is where Kelby officially pops the question to Sidney. Now, I have to call out Dre in this scene because he kind of irritated me. He's trying so hard to talk Sidney out of marrying Kelby, and I get it. Sidney had her reservations about Dre marrying Reese too. But Dre is going way too hard here, and it starts to feel a little selfish. Like, Dre, is Sidney supposed to remain single while you remain married to Reese? Let Sidney be happy.
Looking at this whole marriage thing. Do you think this is just a little too fast? You only known the cat for a couple months.
But on the other hand, even Kelby is starting to notice the closeness between Sidney and Dre, along with Reese, who we already know has had enough of their friendship. And at this point, the waters are only about to get muddier. Things start to feel a little less solid for Sidney and Kelby when she opens up to him about the pressure she feels as a writer, especially while working on her book. He reassures her, but in a way that feels surface level. The kind of encouragement that sounds supportive, but isn't really rooted in real engagement. Of course you can do it and you're great. It's kind, but it's generic. And when Sidney pushes for something more specific, when she asks him what he thought about a particular article she wrote, it becomes immediately clear that he hasn't read it. He doesn't really know her work. He doesn't really follow what she's building, except of course for the article she wrote about him. And I think that's the moment something quietly clicks for Sidney. Because when you contrast Kelby with Dre, the difference is obvious. One of the most defining things about Sidney and Dre's relationship is how deeply they support each other's passions. They see each other. They listen. They care about the details. So when you go from someone who is emotionally and intellectually invested in what you do to someone who doesn't care unless it involves themselves, that gap becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing replaces a partner who is genuinely supportive, and I think Sidney realizes in that moment that she and Kelby aren't aligned in the ways that actually matter to her. And at the same time, everything is falling apart on Dre's side too. The final crack in Dre and Reese's marriage comes when Dre accidentally ends up with Reese's phone, something that happens easily since they have the same one. A message pops up from a man named Richard about dinner reservations. Dre takes Sidney with him to the restaurant, and when they see Reese in there with another man, the truth becomes undeniable. Reese has been cheating. And in that moment, Dre checks out of the marriage immediately. The divorce isn't just implied, it's decided.
We gonna celebrate what? My divorce. How about that?
After that, Sidney and Dre end up back at her place. And on the surface, that makes sense. Dre just found out his wife was cheating. Of course, he would turn to his best friend for comfort. Of course, Sidney would want to be there for him. But when emotions are that raw, when heartbreak, vulnerability, and long suppressed feelings collide, lines get blurry very quickly. Sidney and Dre sleep together, and almost immediately, Sidney regrets it. Not because the feelings weren't real, but because the timing was wrong. She's engaged. Dre is still technically married, and even when something feels emotionally honest, doesn't mean it's ethically clean. This is the moment where truth finally breaks through all the pretending. Sidney can no longer ignore what she feels, Dre can no longer hide what he wants, but now the truth is out. It's complicated, it's messy, it's painful, and it's no longer something either of them can quietly carry alone. Up until this point, Sidney and Dre have had a great understanding of one another, but no friendship is without its moments of conflict. Sidney gets upset when Dre submits his artist's demo to XXL, knowing full well she's the editor who handles the unsigned reviews. It puts her in a clear conflict of interest, and she refuses to step in or override the review just because it's him. In that moment, Sidney is choosing her integrity over her emotional loyalty. But if you listen closely, their conversation starts to shift into something deeper. They begin talking about hip-hop losing its way, about innovation versus roots, about looking back versus moving forward. And that's when you realize they're not actually talking about music. They're talking about themselves. Dre isn't really fighting her about the review. He's fighting her about alignment. Dre wants to revisit the past, what they shared, what they might have missed, what they both know is missing. Sidney wants to move forward. She wants change, even if she doesn't love the shape that change has taken. And you can hear the moment when Sidney realizes the conversation has slipped into emotional territory she isn't ready to enter when she asks, "Are we still talking about hip hop?" Dre asks Sidney to just listen again and follow your heart. On the surface, that sounds simple, especially since we already know there's love there, but emotionally it's pressure. And in that moment, Sidney doesn't. She says she's made her decision. That's not her choosing against Dre, that's her choosing herself. This scene shows us the emotional difference between them at this point in the film. Dre is still reaching backward, trying to reconnect through nostalgia, shared language, and emotional proximity. And maybe that's because his chapter with Reese has ended, and now he fully has the mental and emotional space to be honest with himself about what he really wants. But Sidney is trying to stand in the present with clarity, boundaries, and self-trust. And that's the tension that keeps pulling them out of alignment. This is what the film keeps showing us over and over again. Love that grows out of friendship doesn't disappear when it's left unspoken. It just leaks into other places. It shows up as blurred lines, emotional dependence, and conversations that mean more than they say. And until someone is honest about what's really happening, everybody ends up a little confused, a little hurt, and a little stuck. When Sidney finally meets up with Kelby, everything she's been avoiding comes into focus. She apologizes for being late. She talks about being overwhelmed, about feeling caught in the middle of Dre's label and XXL, about not knowing what to do. But then he says the one thing Sidney hasn't been able to say out loud.
How long are you two gonna play this game?
What are you talking about?
What am I talking about? You don't wanna get married?
I love you.
But not the way you love him.
And Sidney doesn't argue. She doesn't try to explain it away. She doesn't defend herself. She just sits in the truth of it. She admits that she doesn't know why her heart doesn't follow her logic. She only knows that it doesn't. And just like that, it's over. Not with anger, not with drama, but with honesty. This isn't a breakup fueled by betrayal, it's a breakup fueled by emotional clarity. And it's what finally clears the space for the truth Sidney and Dre have been circling around to come all the way to the surface. This scene is where the language finally breaks down. For the entire film, Sidney and Dre have been hiding behind things. They've been hiding behind hip-hop, behind work, behind friendship, behind nostalgia, behind metaphors. Hip-hop has been their emotional proxy. It's been a safe way that they talk about love, longing, disappointment, connection, grief over missed timing, and what they actually mean to each other without ever having to say it directly. So when Sidney is on the radio talking about her book, calling it her love letter to hip-hop, and dedicating the song by saying, "I used to love you, I still do and always will," that's the first time the truth almost slips out into the open. And Dre hears it, he feels it. And that's why he calls in and asks her not once but twice, "When did you fall in love with hip-hop?" Because he's not asking about music anymore. He's asking about them. And for the first time, Sidney doesn't answer in a metaphor. She doesn't hide behind nostalgia or shared history or clever language. She says it plainly. I've been in love with you since the first day I saw you. And Dre meets her there fully, honestly, without hiding, without pretending, without the safety of subtext. That's what makes this moment so special. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's simple. It's two people finally telling the truth after years of circling around it. This isn't just a confession of love, it's an emotional release. It's the culmination of years spent tiptoeing around their feelings, of hiding behind music, work, and friendship. In this moment, the metaphors fall away, the excuses fade, and all that's left is honesty, vulnerability, and connection. That's the heart of Brown Sugar, real, raw, and layered, showing us that love grown from friendship doesn't need grand gestures or perfect timing. It just needs the courage to speak the truth. So now I want to hear from you. What's your opinion on Brown Sugar? Do you think it was fair for Sidney and Dre to involve Kelby and Reese, knowing they were in love with one another this whole time? Or do you understand why they moved the way that they did? As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and head over to allthingsgirlworld.com for more deep dives, nostalgia, and pop culture insights. Until next time, stay safe, and I will talk to you all in the next video.